Thank you for joining us, everyone. Whether or not you've attended a GenNext event before, we're glad to have you here, and we hope that you enjoy today and tomorrow's incredible sessions. Before we get into our conversation around cultivating culture with the extraordinary Nathan Hall, let me give you a little bit of an intro about myself. My name is Naomi Haile. I'm delighted to be your host this morning. I am a creative storyteller and entrepreneur. And 3 years ago, I started the Power of Why podcast, a platform where I interview business and community leaders, venture capitalists, creatives about their non-traditional paths. And part of the reason why I'm really excited to hear from our speaker today is because I believe that strongly that work culture matters, and an organization's culture is more than just a brand that people can see and feel. It's also about how you make decisions that impact your people. It's also about inclusive policy, et cetera. So this is why I started consulting with Quake Lab, a full stack inclusion and communications agency right here in Ottawa, led by Sharon Nyangweso. And I have been involved with the GenNext cabinet for about 2 years. And it's been really great to see the ways in which the United Way East Ontario's GenNext cabinet and team have really bring together and highlight issues that many people are facing on a daily basis, and to also help build, a strong and healthy and safe communities in our region. So from local frontline agencies, from governments and business, from all across different sectors, we believe working closely with our communities is an important part of strengthening our social fabric and conquering complex challenges. So some of the tech items, although I know most of you are very familiar with navigating Zoom, you can use the raise hand function at any point to get the GenNext team's attention for help if you have any issues. And then if you have any questions for Nathan as he gets started on his presentation, you can leave them in the Q&A box by clicking on the Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen. Questions can be submitted at any point of the event, and then at the end we'll be sharing them with Nathan so he can give us his perspective. Please keep the language and dialogue appropriate and respectful, as we do have some moderators watching submissions closely. And then we're also here today thanks to our friends at Tech Savvy, who made GenNext Amplify possible. Thank you so much for your continued support, Tech Savvy. And if you're looking for better internet service, a necessity in our current climate, our handy moderators will be posting a link in the chat for you to learn more. All right, before we begin, I would also like to note that the United Way East Ontario acknowledges that our offices located in the Ottawa region are on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Each and every day, we are grateful to live, work, and play on this land. I'm excited to let you all know that we're here today to celebrate the launch of the GenNext East Ontario as well, formerly known as GenNext Ottawa. GenNext East Ontario unveiled a brand new name a few weeks ago, but we will continue to provide the same big impact in our communities across Prescott, Russell, Ottawa, Lanark, Renfrew, and the Renfrew counties. If you've ever been to a Mix and Mingle or any of our annual mega networking events, Schmooze Fest, for example, you know GenNext is all about bringing people together through philanthropy and fun. That will remain true as we expand our region. GenNext is a social impact movement for people who want to learn about the unique challenges facing our region and create meaningful local change. Powered by United Way East Ontario, GenNext is on a mission to inspire and enable the next generation of changemakers to fuel 100% local impact. And check out the website to gennexteo.ca. You can also sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date on all sorts of things that are happening in the community. Olga will be sharing some links in the chat for you. I'm so proud to let you know that the proceeds from Amplify are going directly back into our communities in support of GenNext's major focus areas, which are mental health, youth homelessness, equitable employment, and diversity and inclusion. And with your help, vulnerable members of our communities are getting the support that they need in the ways that they need it as well. ongoing donations, even small amounts, provide GenNext East Ontario with the reliable funds that they need to fuel lasting change in our region. That's why we've created GenNext Plus. We've got one of our moderators entering that link in the chat for you right now if you are interested in joining. And from early access to discount on events, being a GenNext Plus donor comes with great perks. Best of all, each month you can feel good knowing that you've done a small but great act of sharing local love. So it's time to kick things off and start chatting about cultivating culture in the workplace. We know that's exactly why you're here. So GenNext believes that everyone deserves to be able to build the lives they want for themselves and their families. And we want to build a diverse, vibrant workforce where every person has access to employment, a solid understanding of how to be financially secure and thrive, and an opportunity to become financially independent, all within the workplaces that are inviting, engaging, diverse, and collaborative. That's where our keynote Nathan Hall comes in. Nathan is an award-winning entrepreneur, business leader, and educator. He is the CEO of Culture Check, which is an anti-racism support center for the workforce, which was born out of the need to support the millions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who experience racism in the workplace in all of its forms. Nathan also is the CEO of Simple Story, which you probably have heard of. It's an award-winning video marketing agency made up of artists, marketers, advertisers, and storytellers. So without further ado, let's pass the mic over to our incredible speaker, Nathan Hall. Thank you so much for being here, everyone, and enjoy Nathan's talk.
Thanks, Naomi. Everyone can hear me good? You see me? See the slides? All right, good. Look, I'm gonna cut right to the chase. All right, I'm skipping all the formalities. I'm not opening up with a story. I'm not gonna build this up to some epic revelation. I'm just gonna tell you right off the bat why culture is everything, and then you're free to go if you want. I'm not gonna hold you up here. I'm gonna keep talking. If you want to hang around, but if this is all you came for, you want to know why, I'm going to tell you right off the bat. All right. So listen, why is culture everything? Actually, I changed my mind. Okay. A quick story. And then I'm going to tell you. All right. So a few years ago, a company, it fell on hard times and they found themselves in this death spiral, right? There was poor management, poor quality control, poor product, poor financial management, bad hires, poor leadership. There was no checks and balances. And so as a result, a lot of unhappy clients, sales were plummeting, everything was just falling into chaos. And in the midst of all of this, the CEO jumped ship. Right. So picture like the Titanic when the captain gets onto the boat and just like leaves everybody. This is what was happening. And within months, half the organization was gone, right? They just quit. The other half that was there felt, obviously so uncertain. They didn't know what was going to happen next, what's going on with their careers, everything that they've invested so much in up to this point. People were unhappy. The projects were failing, falling through the cracks, late, incomplete. Everything was a complete mess. Debt was sky high, on the verge of bankruptcy, about to shut their doors until okay, forget the story. Actually, I liked my original approach. I'm just gonna tell you why culture is everything. All right. So why is culture everything? Look, listen. Hold on. I'm blocking the way. Slide to the left. Here we go. What your product or service is to your customer, your culture is to your employees. All right. What your product is to your clients. Which way? Culture is to your employees. Let that sink in, right? And the way you cannot have customers without product or service, you cannot have a team without culture. And because you can't deliver your product or service without your team, that means that culture is the foundation of which your whole organization is built. Culture is everything. So what is culture? Let's look at the definition here. Culture: a set of shared values, goals, attitudes, and practices that characterize an organization, right? So culture expresses goals through values and beliefs and guides activity through shared assumptions and group norms, right? It's the drum beat that keeps everything in sync, right? Culture is the commitment an organization makes to its employees. However, with all this being said, culture is still often ignored by people. Why? It's an afterthought. Why? So much energy, so much thinking goes into our products and our services for our customers, but little to none goes into the product and services for our own people. But here's the incredible thing about culture, right? It spawns and it grows with or without your effort, right? Whether you're talking about a company, your sports team, your family, whatever grouping of people we're talking about, whether you're intentional about going out and forming that culture, it's going to happen. Right? Many families don't sit down and explicitly and intentionally go and define what their household culture is going to be. But if you were to pop into any household, you would quickly see how differently people do things. And so, why is it that so many teams can get away without thinking about this stuff or putting actual work into it? Right? And this is the power and the importance of culture. And this is how it can get overlooked because it is this naturally occurring phenomenon. It doesn't require our effort in order for it to grow. But then on the flip side of things, you have people who do think about culture, but culture to them has just been reduced to artifacts, right? So what are artifacts? Artifacts, over here. These are anything created by humans which give information about the culture of its creators and its users. You see, in many sectors like the tech companies, right, culture is often talked about quite frequently there. But when people talk about these companies, they walk into them and they see like the ping pong tables, they see the free lunches and the beanbag chairs, and they see these tangible things. And they see this stuff and they see that as culture, but those are just the artifacts. Many people try to take shortcuts and I'll just take a ping pong table and I'll put it in my place. And now I've created culture. And they think they're replicating what that company was doing. But here's the thing, I'm blocking it, slide to the right. Cultural artifacts do not create culture. Artifacts are born out of the culture. So this begs the question, if free lunches aren't creating culture, yet culture just grows with or without us, then what is it to cultivate culture? Across literature in organizational culture and organizational behavior, there have been two main dimensions that all culture falls on, regardless of industry and size. So, along the x-axis, it's how do people interact with each other? And then on the y-axis, we have how do people respond to change? And so depending on, let me shrink myself up here so you can see. There we go. Depending on where an organization lands on those two dimensions, it can create one of 8, archetypes of culture, right? So you have learning, enjoyment, results, authority, safety, order, caring, and purpose. So understanding, I'm getting hot. Understanding the vision of your organization and the market that it operates in plays a pivotal role in helping you to achieve them, right? Finding the culture that enables you to create that vision is important. If you're in a fast-moving industry where there's no clear path to success and there's a lot of volatility and you rely on innovation and creativity, the type of culture that you need to foster is very different than, say, a hospital, where the main focus should be on risk mitigation. So in the same way you take the time to find product market fit, you should be working towards finding culture market fit. What characteristics what norms, what behaviors will empower us to achieve our goals. And also, just as important, what characteristics, norms, behaviors will not be tolerated. That second part often gets ignored. Poor behavior is often justified because people are doing a good job, right? Oh, that's a messy discussion. I don't want to engage with that. I'm just gonna, cover my eyes because I mean, as long as you keep hitting those numbers, I'm gonna keep ignoring that bad behavior that you're doing. Just keep coming through with those numbers and keep getting those sales. We're all good, right? But what this does is it creates this double narrative. Okay, you have this main narrative of what you say the culture is. And then you have this underlying story. Where's the other guy? You have this underlying story of what the culture really is, how it manifests itself in practice, and it creates this tension. This is the reality that we have been seeing when it comes to things like inclusion, racism, and discrimination in the workplace. Most companies quickly hold up that banner saying how much they value diversity and inclusion and equity. But the reality across the board, we see that people of color are paid less, are promoted less, occupy fewer executive roles, and all in all experience lower levels of engagement and belonging. When it comes to access to startup funding, small business loans, venture capital, the more diverse you are, the less likely you are to get any of these things. Let me eat this magic mushroom and grow a little bit like Mario. Here we go. I've never personally worked in a place where I've experienced racism, or I've had friends or people in my circle who've experienced racism at work and not have the workplace defend the perpetrator and leave the person who has been victimized even more hurt and disengaged from the company. But these are the same people who will advocate for safe and inclusive work cultures. They would also denounce bullying, harassment, and racism. That's that double narrative. That is a commonly occurring problem. The values on the wall say one thing, but the values in the hall say another. There was this one company who had these words plastered in their front lobby. Where am I here? Respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. Those are some values. Like, this must be the most upright company on the face of the earth. Like, those are powerful values that they uphold, don't you think? I don't know how old this crowd is, if y'all remember, but this lobby belonged to these guys right here. Bad boys of business right here. This is Enron. Enron, who in the early 2000s was the company behind what is still considered the biggest corporate fraud scandal known in the business world. This guy and this guy behind it all. But yet they advocated respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. So let me get back to my story that I started with. So where did I leave off? The company was floundering. It was on the brink of completely collapsing. And on the cusp of shutting its doors, that's when I came aboard. Now, this is not to be self-aggrandizing, but to speak to the power of culture. All right, since taking over at Simple Story, customer satisfaction, repeat clientele is at an all-time high, employee morale and engagement is high, the quality of the work is better, improved profit margins. By every metric and every anecdote, we are better off. So how did we do it? How did we undergo this complete shift and this transformation? So cultivating culture, number one, listen, assess, what's working. Listening, I listened to everybody, right? I spoke with people in depth, sat down for regular one-on-one meetings, scheduled more team meetings and discussions. Silos were a huge issue. We needed more interaction. And I reached out to clients, happy ones, mad ones, reached out to other agencies. I wanted to know everything from every angle. Additionally, I wanted everybody to know everything. People were kept in the dark. They moved in silence. They struggled in silence. The right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. It was unacceptable to me. And as a small team, our ability to execute with excellence and to punch above our weight was contingent on collaboration and information. For each person to make better decisions in their role required better information, better knowledge of the entire organization. So while I was listening and assessing, I needed everyone else to be doing the same thing so that they were more informed on their opinions and their ideas. The thing that should trouble every leader is not knowing what's going on with your people. To have them sugarcoat things for you, to hide things from you, to struggle with things without you knowing. Not knowing the truth should be the fear of every leader. And so creating an environment where you can get that truth from people is essential. During this process, it's important to understand, what's working, right? Because even when things are completely terrible, there's always nuggets of good in everything, right? Plus, you don't want to throw everything out there. It can be extremely overwhelming to people and discouraging. So figure out what to keep, where the strengths are, and then use those strengths to address the issues. So for instance, someone, developed like a great process that was working really well, but no one else knew about it or was using it, right? So expanding that and getting that to everybody. So number one, assess. Number two, it's define the values. Like, what is this new culture all about? Be explicit and clear as to what you are, and you gotta write it down. If it's just culture, if your culture is not documented, then it's not clear. If it's just living in your head, it's open to interpretation. If you just said it once, it's going to be forgot. It's going to be misconstrued. It's going to be broken telephone, right? Taking the time to articulate what you're all about will help you get clearer on what you mean, but it also helps set the expectations are for others. All right. Number three, set the behavior, set the cultural behaviors. When you're clear on what you want to be, it's important to operationalize those values, right? Define the behavior that is expected. Company values, they tend to be very subjective, right? And open to interpretation. We want to make sure that everybody is clear. So when we say that, we are a people first organization or we value our team, what does that even mean? Right? As an employee, what can I expect from this company? How will I be treated? How am I expected to treat others? Do we talk over each other in meetings? Are promotions the result of in-house competition that fosters more self-centered thinking than cooperative thinking? Are our values flexible? Like if I'm really killing it at my job and crushing my quota, does it matter how I treat others? You have to be very clear as to what behavior is acceptable and what isn't. It's essential. What most companies do is they just put up their core values on the wall and then they stop there. They're not truly embedded into the daily practices. It's not clear how people are expected to show up. So to be clear, this is not an exercise in defining all possible behaviors. It's getting like a handful to make it clear as to what these things mean. Next, let me slide out the way here. We got number 4, take stock, right? Who's in and who is out. The next thing you got to figure out is who's coming along for this journey and who's not. Remember Jerry Maguire? Who's coming with me? When shifting directions, you're always going to find people who are blockers, who don't like change, who don't want movement, who just resist everything. They are energy suckers. All right. One of the things I hear most often from managers is that they regret keeping bad employees on the team for so long. There's always this hope, this dream. I can change them. They just need more time. They're not changing. That's who they are, right? But it's actually more empathetic for you not to keep people in the wrong position than it is to keep them there struggling and to keep the rest of the team struggling with them in that position. Removing blockers and energy suckers from your team will do more for your culture than adding a rock star. You need to identify who are your cultural influencers, your energizers, and who are your detractors. And then last, it's about creating that accountability, measuring, monitoring, reporting, right? How do we know if we're on the right path? How do we ensure our values are being honored? Right? It starts with creating that alignment. But once you've identified what behaviors are and are not desirable, you need to align that behavior with performance, with praise, with punishment. If in our monthly check-ins, if I'm your manager and all I do is fixate on, have you finished your project yet? Are you hitting your quota? Right? If those are the things that make me either happy with you or upset with you, if those are the things that I'm measuring, if those are the things that you are rewarded for, guess what you're going to orientate yourself towards, right? Guess what's going to take priority and supersede all other behavior? When I start holding you accountable and say like, hey, you talked over those people. I see you've been doing this a lot, right? And it starts coming up in your performance reviews to be like, yeah, you're hitting your quota, but you keep talking over everybody. You keep railroading people in conversations, right? If I start holding you to the fire and holding you accountable, and that infects your performance reviews and punishments and how happy I am with you, you'll see how quickly behavior changes. When there is clarity on what is expected and clarity on repercussions and clarity on accountability, it removes so much of that anxiety that people have in the workplace. It removes the need to play office politics, right? You don't want that feeling where it's like, well, so and so gets away with acting like that, but I could never do that. Everyone wants to feel like there is fairness, that they know what to expect, and they're not just going to be blindsided, or certain people get certain privileges that others don't. So this was the framework that we use to help turn things around. But culture is a living thing, and it's always changing, it's always evolving. So it requires active involvement and cultivation. So it's not just something you just said it, you did this list here, and then you forget it, right? It's continually maintained, right? So this isn't a one-time workshop or an exercise, this is daily, right? So as new people are added to the team, dynamics, they change, right? When circumstances change, we need to adapt to them. This is why culture is your compass. It's not a map, right? It's not the left, right, 5 miles this way directions on how you're going to get there. It's giving you general guidelines so you know where your north is. Last year, we all made the sudden shift to remote work, right? In conjunction with dealing with the global pandemic, with kids at home, family members getting sick, deaths, social isolations, circumstances changed. When we all moved from in office to online, if there was not intentional thought and communication around how we are all going to show up, how we are all going to work, new norms were destined to form under these new conditions, whether they were intentional or not. And then we went from state of emergency, we all need to work at home, no one knows what the heck is going on in the world, we're out of toilet paper, to months later, where things have regulated themselves, people know what they're in for, right? So it's a completely different mindset. Companies now are shifting to remote work indefinitely. That's another shift that requires explicit attention. Some are going to go hybrid, offline, online, or remote 2 days in office and 3 days at home. All of these shifts drastically change dynamics of a team. Suddenly, how we showed up in the office doesn't translate to Zoom. Suddenly, there is a whole new world of behavior and etiquette, right? Cameras on, cameras off. Am I looking in the camera? Am I not? What signals am I sending to people, right? There's all this new stuff. There's new expectations, right? Do I have to answer emails at 10 p.m.? There's new barriers to communication, right? Like am I getting through to you? Are you paying attention to me? Right now, I'm talking to a screen and I don't hear anybody. I don't see anybody. I don't even know if anyone's over there listening to me. That's okay. I like talking to
We're
myself.
here, Nathan. We're here.
I like talking to myself. It's okay. At first, I heard a lot of companies talking about, I heard people saying that going online wasn't a problem, right? And if you had long-standing teams who worked in offices, what that does is that it banks a certain amount of cultural capital, right? So as you go remote, you go through different changes, employees can withdraw from that account. And it can create a perception that these huge shifts haven't created culture because we already have these interpersonal relationships that I can rely on, right? So I don't have to question like, oh, is she really listening to me? Because I know you. I know that when I start talking or when you're deep in thought, like you start drifting around, or it's like, I know your behavior, right? But as time draws on and team members change, that cultural savings account starts to dwindle, right? The story of how we turned Simple Story around or COVID, these are extreme circumstances that needed to address workplace culture or else face immediate problems. But during the good times, it's just as essential to codify who you are in order to help you scale, to help you recruit, to help you manage, to help you overcome. The expectations from the younger generations, they're getting higher, right? The demand for more diversity, for flexibility, for transparency. And with social media, like we all have a voice. Employees are more empowered than ever. Remote working has opened up jobs across different sectors and different regions. So there's more job availability, more competition, no matter where you are. Culture is your primary tool to attract and retain. Beyond that, I was reading some research that showed, employees are trusting their companies now more than they trust the government. They trust companies more than they trust the government. So there's this greater pressure for organizations to be more active citizens as well, right? And be more involved in their employees' lives. There's more expectations to not sit on the sidelines for injustice. There's more expectations to actively support people with mental health. The office is not just a place to work and collect a paycheck anymore. They are demanding more meaning out of their career and more value alignment. So taking the time to understand how you can cultivate culture should be one of the foremost thoughts of every leader. The day of this leader, this guy, the old school type of boss, right? This day of the old brash, unwavering, unapologetic, hard ass, cutthroat boss, that's over. Nobody wants that anymore. I mean, no one ever did, but they had the power to get away with it. Now, there's nobody, like this is not effective. It's not useful in this type of work environment. Like this isn't going to be effective. This isn't going to fly anymore. The most important skills for a leader to cultivate culture today, it's managing the well-being of your team, right? It's empathy. This whole idea of, leave your problems at home and then just come and do your work, it's trash. That's not how people work. Especially with people working from home, it's like I can literally see your trash in the background of the Zoom call. So it's like you can't separate these things anymore, right? When people can bring their full selves, when they can bring their emotions, when they can bring their hard times and all, they show up better. They perform better. They feel better. They feel more connected, right? Leaders need to combat loneliness. Our society is more lonely than ever. And with remote work, things are getting worse. You might think that that's a personal problem, not a job's problem, a leader's problem. But remember what I told you, a leader's worst fear is not knowing what's going on with your people. So if you are struggling in silence, it's going to start impacting your work. It's going to start impacting how you show up for other people. So it's better that I'm able to build a relationship with you where we can have those open, honest, vulnerable conversations, because then we can support and get you in a better position, right? And when it's the majority of your workforce is starting to feel these feelings of loneliness, of sadness, of despair during these times, you can't just fire and replace because the whole workforce or a lot of the workforce is feeling like this. So we need to figure out, how do we address these things as leaders, right? We need resilience and flexibility. Everything is always changing. Everything is always being disrupted. Leaders need to navigate through chaos. We need leaders who are vulnerable, who are curious, and who foster belonging. So let me be clear. Although, I've spent this time talking about company culture and leadership, culture and leadership are pervasive in all areas of our lives. We are all leaders. We all have the power to lead and influence change right where we are, regardless of title, regardless of age. And culture exists, as I said, on all teams, your family, your workout group, your book club. They all have cultures. All human gatherings benefit from clarity around acceptable behavior, accountability, and collective buy-in. So I challenge you all in your relationships to lean into your leadership and to start being more mindful and intentional about how you're going to show up for others and how you want them to show up for you. So thank you very much for listening. I know over Zoom, I have no idea who's out there. So, you can always, where am I? You can always follow me, Twitter, Instagram. I'm out there. This is my website. It's Culture Check, simple story. And let me know you're out there. LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much.
We are doing questions. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Nathan.
No
Thank you
problem.
so much for sharing your wisdom and gems of inspiration that you've imparted here with us all today. I think it's always uplifting to listen to someone talk about their passion and how we can implement this in it is, as you mentioned, a daily practice, right? And so I just wanted to personally thank you for your time. Folks, we have 3 questions right now that I can see in the Q&A box. So thank you. And we are going to dive right into the Q&A portion of the afternoon. So for one, I have Leanne asking, how can companies who have not been diverse, especially at the management level, make the shift to become more inclusive and have better representation without creating an undue burden for minority employees or falling into tokenism? It's a question from Leanne.
Well, that's a complex question. I I do like multiple day workshops on answering this question. So it's a challenging thing. It is a multifaceted approach. I can tell you that just hiring or just having like your volunteer D&I committee isn't going to do it. Just having a Black History Month event isn't going to do it. It really requires buy-in from the leadership, and to take time to understand what the actual problems are, where the issues are, and a commitment from them. Because at the end of the day, anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, these are culture problems, right? So it can't be like, oh, we have somebody who's thinking about diversity. It needs to be embedded into the very culture, because like I said, unless my behavior is impacting, you know, my success in this organization, then it's not going to mean anything, right? Because we can say all the right things. I can hire that, the diversity consultant to come and say all this stuff. But if the leadership is not committed and putting their full weight behind it, and how the organization is set up, what the governing policies are, how
Yeah.
management is handling these things, then nothing is going to take effect. So I know a lot of companies are, they're making these claims and they're trying to set up these committees and, hire this and that. But like, unless you're changing something, because if
Yeah.
I just bring someone to the table, it doesn't mean now I've created an environment where I'm willing to hear that voice and that I'm willing to change, or I've created a safe environment where, okay, when there is a problem, you can speak up, right? It's like, was I put in this chair just to look good, for y'all, but I'm not going to create a fuss, right? Which is oftentimes what we see. But this isn't something that can be a tack on approach. It needs to come fundamentally, from the leadership and be built from the inside out.
I think for so great points. I think for so long, this work has looked like, or we're going to host an unconscious bias training workshop, or we're going to have champions around this, or we're going to have an unpaid, committee where you're asking people to do this type of work, often minority, underrepresented employees, to say, hey, in addition to all that you're doing for a company, do this over here as well for free. And it's tough without those policy changes, as you mentioned, because they are structural at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So great points.
And even outside of policy, I mean, culture falls outside of policy, because you can have as much policy as you want, but you know what I mean? Like, I've seen places that have anti-harassment or anti-bullying, anti-racism. It still happens and nothing happens. You know what I mean? Like, people still feel it and nothing happens as a result of that. So, there needs to be policy in place. There needs to be structures in place. But if the culture, it's very easy to circumvent policies, right? If no one's holding anybody accountable
Accountable. Yeah.
within anything, like
Yeah.
everyone has policies, but it doesn't mean that they're being invoked. It doesn't mean that they're being upheld. So, I mean, it really requires this really deep fundamental change. And I don't know if a lot of companies are there where they're willing to make those types of sacrifices and changes.
Another question that we have here from David is, well, he says, thank you for this talk, Nathan. Would there be any books that you would recommend that help to cultivate culture?
Um, let's see here. I get things from a lot of books. I like Fearless Culture, Fearless Organization. The Fearless Organization talks a lot about psychological safety. I think is very key. I love all of Jim Collins' stuff. Um, I like the Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix. His new book was solid, but again, that was really for fast moving, innovative teams. So, like I said, understanding what type of culture you are aiming
Mhm.
towards, and then it kind of orientates yourself to, okay, what is it that I need to do that? But I think fearless organization and just this idea of psychological safety, of how do we create those safer environments where we know what's going on, people feel free to raise their hand. That's really the foundation, I think, of most culture, that we need to have successful culture. And that's also the foundation of successful, DNI. That's the foundation of successful anti-racism, is that, there is that psychological safety.
Great. Lauren here asks, well, she says, first, thanks for the presentation. I used to work in the nonprofit sector where I think folks are very cognizant of the need to actively foster culture. I joined the government recently where I find the understanding of organizational culture is almost totally absent. Have you worked with the government? Have you worked with government teams? And what do you suggest for someone who is not in a formal position of leadership, but wants to take a leadership role in nudging their teams towards more culture consciousness?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm wrestling between, how I want to answer this. Yes, I've worked with government, and it is tough. I think that if this is something that's very important, I have never seen culture change if this who's in charge doesn't change, if the CEO doesn't change or the managing director. Um, and so it's like, I've tried, firsthand to be like, okay, well, like I'm gonna try and do what I can. And so if it's at a point where it's, intolerable to you, insufferable, like I don't believe there is much you can do to really influence culture. Or like you can influence it, but you're not going to change it, and you're not going to have the change that you like to see, and it's going to take so much longer than you're anticipating, right? So I think, one, understanding what it is, what your goals are, what your needs are, how is it, and taking the time to understand, how do I want to show up at work, right? What is the career that I want to have for myself? Am I able to show up for work in the way that I want to and I need to in this organization? And then if you feel like, okay, yes, I can, then it's a matter of, okay, how can I influence people more? And it is long and hard. So depending on your direct manager, what their involvement is, and then your access to whoever is in charge, the CEO or managing director, executive director, whatever access you have to them to be able to start having these conversations. And it's going to take a lot of extra work to be like, okay, here's, oh, I read this book, or there's this workshop, I'd really like to engage in this, what are your thoughts on this, and really get them involved. But I think roping in those decision makers is key. So being able to get them on your side is absolutely essential. But I've seen a lot of people struggle with this a long time, and really, bang their heads up against the wall, trying to move something that doesn't want to be moved. So I think you need to get real with yourself first. What is it that you want? What kind of workplace do you want? And is it possible here? And then make that decision.
I have a question as a follow up to what you just said. When it often, if people do decide to take on that responsibility and loop in leadership, as you mentioned, and say, hey, this is something that I think is really important and also benefit, benefit the company as well. Um, Often when they are banging or they're between, a rock and a hard place, they end up just leaving. They're like, okay, this is not even worth it. So what do you say to people who, have tried and have pushed and have tried to pressure in those different ways, but aren't really seeing success as a next step or a next? What can they do from that
Yeah, yeah.
position?
I mean, I think it's hard. I know a lot of people struggle because, like, I give, very blunt. I'm trying to be, more diplomatic because this is recorded. But I to me, it's no different from a relationship, right? It's like, you spend years pouring to this person, and it's like, okay, this isn't working, and it's like, oh, they're gonna change, and you just spend so much energy investing in somebody who doesn't want to change, who's never going to be the partner that you need them to be. And I know people really have a hard time with letting letting people go. And it's like,
Mm,
this isn't where I'm meant to be. But I think that if we get to a point where more of the employee base is empowered, that I'm not going to accept nonsense, then
mm,
businesses are going to be forced to change, right? Like
right.
we saw over the summer, it's like, okay, as organizations or as grassroots, everyone's like, organizations need to say something. My work needs to say something. The workplace was forced to do something. As long as there's that one voice saying, I want change, that's very easy to ignore, right? But the more empowered we are as individuals, that I can walk away from this situation. And now it's like, I know that I'm not holding you here. People are only staying to work here because they want to be here, not because they are forced, not because they have no other options. So I think we get to the point where we empower ourselves that we can walk away from bad situations, then managers, organizations are going to have to change. So it's
Yeah,
it's it's
and
hard. right? It's
Yeah.
very hard to get to that point. But I think, I think it's going to create so much more happiness, right? Because like the people I've talked to, like, just like one-on-one, they have such a hard time, like, oh no, but I've spent 5 years here. If I just keep going, then things are going to change. Oh, next quarter, things are going to be different. And they're always hoping and hoping and hoping, scared to make that cut. Right. I've seen it with,
Right.
interpersonal, like dating relationships
Yeah.
too. Like so scared to make that cut. But once they do, they're like, oh, wow. Right. And just the fear of the unknown, the fear of what's going, like, who am I going to date? Like, I'm going to feel so alone. I'll never find a job that's really going to make me happy. Right. But taking the time to understand what is it that I want and stop compromising on those things. Stop compromising on how you want to show up for work. Stop compromising on your values. I think, the workforce would be a very different place. And I'm hoping that, with the energy that we're seeing, last year, and then I think just with social media in general, people are more emboldened with their voice now that they see, oh, there's people behind me who feel like these things, or there's organizations who do support this. It's going to put a lot more pressure on people, I believe. And I think with COVID, it's put a lot of pressure on managers too, because it's changed how managers have to manage people. And there was no choice. Like we had to figure out how to do it. And so I think it's going to create more of that empathetic leadership, and leaders who have all those characteristics that I described are going to thrive more. And those who don't have those things of fostering belonging and curiosity and
Yeah.
vulnerability, they're going to get kicked out because they're not going to be effective. Those teams are going to be hurt. So I think there is like a shift that is coming or has come. So it's just a matter of keep on pushing it. But it requires all of us to really be clear on what we want and not compromise on that.
Right. Great. And as for the pressure that employees can push, David asked, from a consumer perspective, when you're buying from companies, how would you suggest we combat and hold companies accountable for their policies and transparency as well?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's power in the dollars. I think as a consumer, that is the most powerful thing. I know it often doesn't feel like it. It's like, oh, what's my $15 going to do to Nike or whoever? It doesn't feel like it, but as long you keep on communicating those things, you keep sharing it. Again, like everyone has their platforms to be able to share these things and to express our opinions, but then just living the life that you value. And I think there is power in that. Change doesn't come quickly, it doesn't come easy. But I think as an individual, when we get clear on our own values, when we are uncompromising and we really live
Yeah.
out those values, we lean into those values. And it's not like I have values from 6 to 7 a.m. the next morning, and then I check those values at the door, and then I just do my job. When I'm
Right.
able to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I'm really living out my values in the food that I eat, the clothes that I wear, the media that I consume, the place that I work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really changes things. It has an impact. So you're not going to shut down Nike just by not buying their shoes right away. But it starts to build that awareness of those around you. And these movements are slow, and then you never know. There could be one instance that happens that just sets everything, that triggers a whole bunch of movements, like we saw last year. All this stuff, all these
Mm-hmm.
conversations were happening just at a smaller scale, and then last year it just kind of blew things up. Like you can't anticipate those things. So I think just really living out those values is my biggest recommendation.
It's a butterfly effect. And so we're running up on time, but I have a question from an individual in the audience who wants to be kept anonymous, who says, "Thank you, Nathan. That was amazing and gives the world so much hope for culture change and reconciliation. Have you thought of running for federal, provincial, municipal political leadership?" I love this question.
You, you didn't hear my last comment about working with the government?
This This is in a different context, I would say.
No, no, I haven't considered that.
No,
I
you'll leave
don't
it
know
at
if
that.
that's
Okay.
I don't know if that's my calling. I don't believe it is, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. I appreciate the
We'll see. We'll see.
I
And the last question for
appreciate
you,
the
Nathan. This is
yeah. Hmm?
the last question. It's a fun one. What's your favorite song to amplify when you need a boost?
I was just trying to figure that out before I got on this call. I'm like, let me put on something. So I played 3 songs before I got here. It's always different. First I played, it's an old song from the 90s. It's called Word is Life by the Poor Righteous Teachers. And then I played Toast by Coffee. And then I played Win by J Rock. So those are the 3 tracks I was listening to before I came on this call.
Love them.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Nathan, for being here. Thank you to everyone for joining. We really hope that you enjoyed yourselves. I know that I did. I know that Nathan did as well. So a huge thank you to Nathan for giving such an incredible presentation. Once again, a huge shout out to our program sponsor, Tech Savvy. None of this would be possible without them. For those of you who are new to GenNext, welcome, and we hope to see more of you. Please check out our website, gennexteo.ca, and sign up for the newsletter. And finally, if you're able to make a donation to GenNext, just know that it is so appreciated, and we support and receive, and the support we receive will help to break down barriers, improve lives, and create opportunities for the people who need it most. Thank you all. We hope to see you at later Amplify sessions. You can find today's schedule in your inbox or on our website. And again, thank you. Thanks, everyone. And make sure to follow Nathan on social media.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.